And blessed to be part of your day. Kvin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Joining us now, New York Times bestselling author, national bestselling author, David Limbaugh. Jesus is Risen, his new book, Paul and the Early Church. Mr. Limbaugh, thank you again for joining us, David.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, every time I talk to you, and I know you're going to go get to the book, Kevin, but, our friend Sean McCabe always says hello. And
hey, I just met his brother.
Yeah.
Tell him hello.
I certainly will. David, let's talk a lot about your new book, Jesus is Risen. How important was Paul to the church?
Instrumentally important. If he had not been around, the church would not have grown like it did. In fact, the Bible says that God chose Paul as his evangelist to the Gentiles before he even created the universe. So God knew that Paul was fundamental, indispensable in his transmission of the gospel.
And David, when you think of why Paul compared to the apostles that were with him to the end in the resurrection and the ascension, why Paul, do you think?
Well, I think it had to do with his combination of attributes. He was extremely intelligent, very passionate, very emotional, very sincere, and he was steeped in the Jewish law. He understood God's Mosaic law, and he was devoted to it. And when he was converted, at the time he was converted, he was in the process of persecuting Christians because he believed they were not just starting a competing religion, but diluting and perverting the original true religion. So Paul was uniquely positioned once he was converted to explain the gospel to people who were not yet exposed to it. And he could do it by showing how the new covenant was a fulfillment, was a replacement of the old covenant. The New Testament was a completion of the Old Testament, that Christ was the one God had promised by the Old Testament prophets. Paul was able to show that by his intimate knowledge of the Scriptures.
David, we take the church for granted these days. What were the struggles of the early church like?
They were severe. The book of Acts, this book, by the way, is about the book of Acts and 6 of the Apostle Paul's 13 epistles. And they chronicle the history of the early church, which is what the biblical text does. And this book traces the biblical text and summarizes all of it and tells it in a story with commentary so that people will get a better understanding of these biblical books and the history of the early church. And they faced fierce opposition from the very beginning by the Jewish authorities and by the political authorities, secular authorities, who did not want them to spread this word. The Jews obviously didn't, for the reasons I just earlier stated, but the political authorities didn't want this kind of chaos, knowing how this religion was setting people on fire and how people were talking about the risen Jesus. So they did everything they could. They beat them, imprisoned them, and stoned them, some of them to death. And, yeah, it was fierce during the beginning times.
David, in your book, Jesus is Risen, here on KIDO Talk Radio, how did the apostles convince skeptics and convert people that, believe Jesus may be a prophet, but not that he was the Son of God, not that he was God?
Well, their main qualification for doing that was their own transformation from skeptics and cowards, even after Jesus died, when Peter, for example, denied him 3 times, to bold proclaimers of the gospel after they had seen the risen Christ in the flesh. That people of other faiths have been sincere when they have martyred themselves for their own sincere beliefs. But there's a difference in Christianity. It is inconceivable that these early apostles and early Christians would have died for something they knew to be a lie. That is, they didn't die based on some abstract theological or philosophical belief. They were willing to die because they had witnessed Christ intervene in human history, live a sinless life, be crucified, and then be resurrected. They saw that, and they were willing to stake their lives on it.
David Limbaugh joining us here. Jesus is Risen, Paul and the Early Church. His new publication, his new book. We urge you to go out and get it. David, what about the Roman Empire, and how did they play a part in the spread of Christianity?
Well, the Christianity was spread by the early church all throughout the Roman Empire, Asia Minor, Greece, Macedonia, and as far west as Spain. And it was by suppressing the early Christians, it actually caused the gospel to spread more. And in fact, this started in Jerusalem. Ironically, Paul, who, while he was engaged in persecution in Jerusalem of Christians, his persecution was so severe that the Jews spread out into the outer reaches of the empire and set up their own synagogues for worship. And when Paul and the other evangelists finally made their way as Christians, trying to evangelize other people, those synagogues where the Jews worshiped were ready-made for evangelism and for worship for the spread of the Christian message.
David,
but now you may be talking about another point, which is there was a Pax Romana, the peace that the Roman Empire had established. There was a common language. There were roads. There's transportation and common communication, and all of this was providentially arranged for the time that Christ came to earth, and it facilitated the spread of the Christian message.
David, what type of man was St. Paul?
Well, he was, as I've described, he was extremely intelligent. And when you read his letters to the various churches that he established, you will find that he was really just a real, raw, authentic person who wore his emotions on his sleeves. And these churches that he planted, he treated them in his heart as if he had given birth to children. And that when they deviated from the true gospel, it really grieved him. And he wrote to them trying to urge them back to the correct path and not to follow the false teachers.
David Limbaugh joining us here. Jesus is risen, Paul and the early church. David, a few more questions. I know you're very busy. We always appreciate you coming on the program here in Idaho.
Thank you.
We go back to Paul, and here was a guy as Saul, as you said, David, converted Christian or condemned Christians, put them to death, and yet won them over, became one of the greats, if not the greatest. Can we talk about how he established that trust? I mean, it certainly must have been from God.
Yeah, I think one way he did it, obviously it was all from God. Yes, I concede that point. But he wrote that while he was adamant about not diluting the gospel and about keeping the message pure, he was also willing not to become all things to all people. That is, and that's where that phrase comes from. When he was around Jews, he would adopt the Jewish practices, even though they were no longer necessary for salvation or no longer necessary at all. But he would adopt those practices so as not to alienate the Jews. When he was around Greeks, he would act in their customary manner, and he would do what he had to do to relate to people on their level. And so he established an immediate trust. He didn't demand compensation from the churches. He was sincere. It was obvious that he was after their hearts and after God's heart and not seeking to fulfill his own interests. And I think that ultimately was apparent to them. The only people it wasn't apparent to were the false teachers and the people that they had duped into believing their false message and their criticism of Paul. But most people who encountered him realized his authenticity and his sincerity and genuineness as a human being.
David, how did he fight the false teachers?
Pardon me, how did he what?
How did he combat them? How did he disprove the false teachers?
In his earnest pleas, in his letters, which he had written, as I mentioned, after he had visited and planted these churches, and then he'd gotten word back that some of them were deviating from the true gospel. He wrote these letters, and this is what's so fascinating that people ought to read. In the book, I go through verse by verse of these 6 letters that he wrote on his missionary journeys. He had 3 missionary journeys throughout the Roman Empire to spread the gospel. And in his letters, he's explaining the gospel of Jesus Christ, the doctrine of justification by faith in Jesus Christ alone. And he's saying that he got that gospel message directly from Christ himself, who encountered him on the road to Damascus and converted him. But sheerly out of the force of his arguments and the authenticity of his personality, he proves that he's the real deal. And he later got confirmation, by the way, after he'd written these letters, and he sent Timothy and other of his disciples and other people who were colleagues working with him to these various places, and got word back that these letters had in fact had a positive impact, and people were returning to the Word.
And David, finally, any takeaways today from Paul that we can share with us? Jesus is Risen, your new book. We urge folks to go out and get it. We always appreciate your work, sir.
Thank you. Well, my main purpose in writing my Christian-themed books, and this is the fourth, is to inspire people to read the Bible itself. And the way I do that is by exposing them to what the Bible really says. That's what this is. This is 7 books of the Bible, the book of Acts, 6 of Paul's epistles. I go through, as I said, verse by verse, and orient people, give them a primer on what these books say, what they mean by interlacing them with the commentary from some of the greatest Christian thinkers. It's kind of a series of Sunday lessons that lay people can relate to, but there's also enough of deep dive into the books that people who are more advanced than just beginners can profit greatly by this. And ultimately, as I said, the goal is that they will end up then transitioning into the Scripture to know and
Well, David, we always appreciate you, and good luck and continued success, sir.
Thank you so much for the interview. Appreciate it.
All right, there is the one, the only David Limbaugh. That is right. You might know his brother. He does a radio show, and we used to have him on here for years and years. We love David Limbaugh. I've known him for years, and with David, it's always get right to the book. It's not a lot of chit-chat. He's very focused. And what a lengthy book it is. David Limbaugh, Jesus is Risen, Paul in the Early Church. We highly recommend you go out and get it. Kvin Miller in the morning here. Coming up next, where's the caravan and what it means to gem staters? That more on 107.5 FM, 580 AM, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning.
No luck for anyone last week. That means this week's Powerball drawing starts at $620 million. That drawing will come on Wednesday. If you can't wait that long, there's another game you can play. Mega Millions is up to a whopping $1.6 billion, and players are in it to win it.
Everybody's going out trying to get tickets. I went yesterday and was a line there where you went.
I believe in dreams, and who knows?
That attitude is keeping sales brisk, and that's a good thing, because good sales could push the Mega Millions jackpot close to or even past $2 billion by Tuesday's drawing. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
And there we have it, $2 billion. How many people would actually do that? Would you invest? Of course, that's all you're going to hear at work is, hey, why don't we do these lottery tickets? $2 billion. And really, what's the message of the lottery? Think about that for a minute at 580-5436, 580-KIDO. You win the lottery and all your problems are solved. Everything is great. But very different from the interview we just had with David Limbaugh talking about St. Paul, the Apostle Paul. Gave his life to Christ, gave his life to the church, literally gave his life. And yet today we're talking about, man, if I got that money, what would I do? Well, I've told you what I would do. I would buy the broadcast center. I'd have everybody here. Their work uniforms would be superhero outfits. And they would be required to wear superhero outfits. And, we'd have a good time. Of course, that's what everybody says. But when you think about the lottery, and everybody that does it, they usually end up going broke. So perhaps it's better that we don't have the lottery fever. Perhaps we should be the first people in America to speak out against the lottery. Heck, I know even the staunchest fiscal and social conservatives are playing the lottery, and that plays right into the lottery. Look, the lottery is good for people that run the lottery. But for everybody else, is it so good? And you think about getting your dreams answered. Is that, and not to get too new agey here this morning, but your dreams are answered, then what's next? What's life without the struggle? Kevin, I've struggled enough. I feel your pain. Traffic and weather together.
Evans, Eric Gabbard.
The questions as we go forward, number one, how will they get to the U.S.? Bus, maybe a train, or try to walk? That's going to take a long time, 1,400 miles. Secondly, where are they going to go? Texas, Arizona, California, they don't know, we don't know. Thirdly, what's going to happen when they ask for asylum?
And there we have it from our own Fox News reporter, William Lejeune, about the migrant caravan that continues to go. Now, I thought that the Mexican government had shut that down, but apparently that didn't happen. So now you have over 1,400 folks coming to America. And here's the thing that gets me. And you've asked yourself this. Who's paying for this? You've asked yourself this. People just don't get on a train like the traveling Wilburys and come to America. They've got to be fed. They've got to be rested. They've got to have clothes. And for all the people that we hear and see that say that people have a right to America, that America should have open borders, well, who is going to pay for them? It comes down to a point where we have no money. We have no money to pay for ourselves, and yet we want to bring in these folks that don't have any skills. It's like a job, right? You got to have a resume. You got to be on LinkedIn. You got to be there. You got to be that. The other day, I saw a job, and it said, well, send us your resume. What are your requirements? Don't you believe that there has to be requirements to be a citizen of this country? Just like someone that you let into your home, you let into your workplace. And obviously, we have people that are behind this, right? Here's more with our own Griff Jenkins.
If that caravan gets to this border here in McAllen, Texas, they're going to find an overwhelmed border already. They have over 4,000 apprehensions of illegal crossings per week. Over the weekend, I've been here, more than 1,000 arrested, more than 1,000 pounds of marijuana confiscated as well. Now, that caravan, which has grown over 5,000, some say up to 7,000, is moving strongly here. Some saying that...
Right. Again, who's paying for this? Let's say you wanted to go to Missouri. Let's say you wanted to go to Georgia. Let's say you wanted to go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Well, you would have to put gas in your car. You would have to buy food, buy fuel, get time off from work, and you'd have to get a job in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Or better yet, Pullman, Washington. Many of you are Cougar fans. You love Washington State. Well, not many, but you have a lot of people that love the Cougs, right? So the first time ever, I guess, College Game Day, which is this big thing that ESPN puts on, put on by the Home Depot, they go to Pullman, Washington. Over 20,000 people show up. They've had game day here once before on the Blue. Maybe we had 10,000, which is still pretty good. But you had a guy who was served as a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine. He got in his car and drove, took him the entire week to get there. But he had to get cash. He had to get money. He had to get his act together. Who are these people that can just drop everything at the drop of a hat? And then they say the children and the women, they've got the marijuana. We've heard about human trafficking. Where is the left talking about the safety and security of these folks and these governments that just let them pass through?
The politics behind it will end up here, at least in Texas, Arizona, or California, and try and cross. And it is the major concern of the officials here, like Chief Manuel Padilla, who's a sector chief here in the Rio Grande Valley. He says if the caravan gets here, they will be ready.
Well, that's wishful thinking, Chief. Essentially, what they're doing is they do in the old NFL, they're flooding the zone. And that's what they throw in. So many receivers, there's not enough defense for it. That's what we see on our southern border. And the president wants to build the wall. If we had the wall up, if we were constructing the wall, we wouldn't have this issue now, would we? That's what I'd like to talk to you about coming up next. Also, the death of this reporter who worked for the Washington Post, who was a Saudi, but the Turks seemed to like him. And now everybody wants to commit World War III about it. What about Daniel Pearl? What about the other folks that have been killed? Where was the outrage there? And by the way, who are we to tell these folks how to run their business? Are we condoning what happened? No. But is a reporter more important than another victim of terrorism? Lots to think about, more to talk about with me. Kevin Miller next on KIDO Talk Radio. That's 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Good morning, Maggie.
Good morning, Kevin.
And out to London on KIDO Talk Radio, Fox News Radio's Simon Owen with the very latest concerning this reporter, the Saudis admitting that he died, and the very latest. Simon, good morning.
Hey, Kevin. Morning. Yes, there's been a dramatic shift in the Saudi position on this case over the course of the weekend. After 2 weeks of denials, saying that it was a baseless lie to say that Jamal Khashoggi had been killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. On Friday night, Saudi Arabia put out a fresh statement saying actually Jamal Khashoggi did die in the consulate. They say there was a fist fight and that he was killed. And Saudi Arabia says there has been a swift domestic response. 18 people arrested, 2 senior aides to the Crown Prince fired. But there has been some skepticism about that explanation. President Trump initially said it was credible, but he's also said he wants more details. Here in Europe, Britain, Germany and France say that the Saudis have put out hypotheses, but that they need to back those with credible facts. And Turkey says it will detail its own investigation tomorrow.
I think it all comes down to whether or not the Turks have and do release, if they do, the alleged audio tape of what they believe went down.
Or whatever else they may have gathered, indeed. And I mean, there's yet more leaks coming from this investigation today, one suggesting that a member of a 15-person team, which Turkish officials have previously described flying into Turkey from Saudi Arabia in the hours before Jamal Khashoggi disappeared and then flying out again a few hours after he did, this latest leak describes how one member of that team, who was of a similar physical appearance to Jamal Khashoggi, was seen walking out of the consulate in his clothes and visiting a few tourist sites in the hours afterwards, as if to be spotted on security cameras and be able to back up the initial Saudi story, which was that this journalist had left. Now, you mentioned the audio tape. That is something that's been reported on repeatedly in the past couple of weeks, and we're not clear whether American intelligence has actually heard it or not. President Trump has said you've got to share that if it exists, but as far as we're aware, it's potentially not been shared, and there was one American lawmaker, I forget which one it was, but over the weekend said that the Turks appear to have been talking to the media more than they've been talking to their American allies, and that's the sort of thing that, yeah, we wait to see what the Turkish president has to say. He's going to address Parliament tomorrow. All he said in the build-up is that this will be the naked truth.
Indeed. Of course, you wonder how challenging it will be to get the truth in this case.
Yes, you do. I mean, the Turks on their side have a number of big Western countries who are clearly skeptical about this explanation from the Saudis, and indeed the Saudi story has shifted again since that statement came out that I mentioned on Friday night in the early hours of Saturday. Well, the Saudi foreign minister spoke to us on Fox News yesterday, and he said that we don't know details of how Jamal Khashoggi died. Well, that's a contradiction. They said it was a fist fight in this statement. He said we don't know where the body is, and he also described this as a murder rather than an accident. So the Saudi story doesn't seem set in stone. And more than that, it's pretty bare bones, the stuff that they've put out there so far. So if the Turks can come forward with a whole raft of evidence, let alone this tape, but whatever else they might have gathered in the meantime, they've been doing a lot of searches, a lot of interviews of local consulate staff, we understand. If they can come out with something credible, then yes, there may be that may be what the Western governments can use to push the Saudis for whatever changes they want to see after this. But if it's vague and inconclusive, then that's where it may be possible for the Saudis to look at saying, look, you can't prove anything and we've given you our explanation, so time to move on. But Germany has become the first country to suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and that's generally the call that Western governments face when the Saudis do something unpleasant, is a call to suspend arms sales, and so one country now is doing that.
What about the relationship, Simon, between Turkey and Saudi Arabia?
Complicated, in a word, as things often are as you get towards that part of the world. I think one of the questions is, they've had this curious thing where we've got this central allegation that this journalist was killed in a consulate, and as I say, the Saudis denied that for more than 2 weeks. But Turkey never made that claim on the record. It's always been off the record. It's always been anonymous officials who won't have their name put in the article that eventually gets written. And you wonder if there is perhaps something there where the Turkish president is just trying to hint to the Saudis, or hint pretty blatantly, that he has some kind of leverage over them. Recep Tayyip Erdogan does not have his own record on tolerating dissent is not the most open either. And so is there something there where he's trying to strike a deal with the Saudis? We don't know. Certainly, though, in his comments, he's been pretty consistent in saying that Turkey will go public with whatever comes out. And as I say, this phrase that he's using to preview his speech to Parliament tomorrow, he says it'll be the naked truth.
Simon, we appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. The president just tweeting moments ago, it looks like Mexico has not done their very best to stop this caravan. Details forthcoming. Phone numbers here, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Let's go to Max in Garden City. Max, good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio. How do we stop the caravan?
That is really interesting. President Trump's threat to blow the Mexicans out of the trade deal has had some effect, but obviously not enough. But all right, honestly, don't you think the media is putting a little bit too much attention on this caravan? They hit the border.
Right.
The Mexicans stopped them on a bridge. A lot of them started going around the bridge and crawling under the river. What the media isn't showing is that Mexican troops have been snapping them up as they come across the water. The size of that caravan has been cut down hugely. It's only a fragment of what it was. And now they're recruiting Mexicanos on the Mexican side to join the caravan because Mexicans they didn't stop it, but they really tore it a new one.
Well, apparently they didn't tear it a new one enough because they're still coming, aren't they?
Well, not nearly as many as were on the other side of the river, which is part of the border. They stopped most of them. They've been setting up tents and internment camps so they can speak to them, interview them, process those, turn those back. And I understand thousands still made it through. And I'm not sure if we could have done any better, because just how forceful can you be before the world starts to blame you for being insensitive to their human rights?
Right.
And they're not immigrants. Even you are using the term immigrants when they are aliens. They are illegal aliens. They are felons. They are criminals in waiting, in passing. My wife is an immigrant. It took us over 2 years. It took an arduous process of interviews, background investigations, a lot of money to finally get my wife. And she's married to an American at that time for over 9 years. And it took all of that to get her into the United States. These people are being told that America has open arms. We're waiting for them. And as they find out that's not the case, there are also a number of them dropping out of the caravan. I don't know what it will be like 1,200 miles later if they ever reach the border, but it will be a mere fragment of what it was when it left Honduras.
Max, thank you for the call.
Hey, thank you, sir.
Now, many people that we know from the state of Idaho did travel to see the president this weekend in Elko, Nevada. If you stayed home on Saturday, here's what you missed.
We call him 1% Joe because he ran at least twice. I think 3 times. They say twice. I think he ran 3 times. And he never had more than 1%. So we call him 1% Joe. Obama came along and took him off of the trash heap and made him vice president. So we call him either Sleepy Joe Biden or 1%. Which is better? She said Creepy Joe. No, I would never do that. I would never insult him like that.
Creepy Joe Biden. Oh, boy. And if you did go see the president, we would love to get your thoughts on this. We are talking about this caravan. The president tweeting today, sadly, it looks like Mexico's police and military are unable to stop the caravan heading to the southern border of the United States. Criminals and unknown Middle Easterns are mixed in. I've alerted Border Patrol and military that this is a national emergency. must change the laws, and must build the wall. Isn't that what it really comes down to? At 580-5436, 580-KIDO, that's what it comes down to, is stopping the migrant caravan. And does anybody really believe that Mexico does not want to stop these folks from going through? It's like the country of Mexico, because they're from Guatemala, Honduras, maybe even a little Nicaraguans thrown in, are coming through your country. It's like somebody going through your house. You're not going to let somebody go through your house, are you?
I think this ought to be a relationship-altering event for the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, that we ought to suspend military sales, we ought to suspend certain security assistance, and we ought to impose sanctions on any of those that were directly involved in this murder.
I think it's insulting to anyone who's analyzing this with any kind of intelligent background to think that, a fist fight led to a dismemberment with a bone saw.
I am not going to accept this. If we accept this, every other person who could do this will. And the next thing you know, our enemies are going to lose respect for us, and we'll lose our moral voice. And that's a voice that cannot afford to be lost.
I think it is to hold the people accountable who committed this horrible act. And if it is the Crown Prince, then I think that is something that has to be explored. I don't believe that you can have someone who would authorize this sort of an act be in a position of power with a nation that's very important to us.
The Crown Prince has his fingerprints all over this, and the fact that he is heading up the investigation makes it totally incredible.
There we have it. More on this Crown Prince thing and this reporter that was killed. Is that something that we should be getting into? We'll talk a little bit about that. First, to Liberty Linda with Kvin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Liberty Linda.
Good morning, Kevin. You know, I'm wondering, what are they coming here for? Are they coming here to vote?
Well, I think they're coming here for a lot of things: health care, food, shelter, you name it.
I know they're coming. I see them in shorts. They're carrying their children on their shoulders. They can't walk all day long with their children on their shoulders. They're not carrying any bags with them. I mean, like you said, how are they eating? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I'd say the whole thing doesn't make sense, except if you're a lefty on the press, because you're pushing an agenda.
I agree. Well, I heard the president say he would put the military on the border. Now, I hope he does, because we cannot let this go on. We have to protect our nation and the people that are already living here. So it's just unimaginable. It's unimaginable that we're watching this. And then what's going on with this reporter guy? My question is, was there a camera at the back door? We know we saw him go in. It was the consulate, I believe. But is there a back door to it? Was there a camera at the back door? That's the question I keep asking. And is he going to show up? Is he going to show up somewhere and be okay? So I think that our president needs to handle this very carefully. We don't want to go to war. Anyway, so we got two major things going on besides everything else, and questions. We have questions for each one. What are all these people coming here for? So anyway, that's it.
Well, they're coming to take over.
I agree with you, 100%. We have been allowing it now for so long. I have been in meetings where I've been told, you may not call us illegal aliens anymore.
Yeah.
I've been in meetings where we have been told to our face, we cannot call them that anymore. They are immigrants.
Right.
And, this was in San Diego. So I know that they're trying to brainwash us. Well, they threatened us. We cannot call them that anymore. So I've been there. I've heard that in meetings with big companies. And we were actually told you may not call us illegal aliens anymore. And what do? You want to keep your job. You're afraid to say anything.
Words that I live by every day, dear friend.
I know. And Kevin, I'm going to give you a big hug today.
Well,
a telephone hug.
There's one right back at you.
Thanks, Kevin. You're wonderful. Love listening to you. You're the best. Let's wait and see what goes on now. That's all we can do.
All right, Liberty Linda, you have a great day.
You as well. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Should we put the military on the border? How can we stop the caravan? Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio.
Continuing mystery that is not a mystery is how a president and an administration can have what is essentially peace and prosperity or economic growth and no new wars and still be struggling to get to 50%, which in the approval polls, which if you can't is a drag on all of your people. It just is the central fact, I think, of the coming election.
You accept standard political gravity, and I don't think you can do that with Donald Trump. And I do think that there is an argument to be made for people telling pollsters one thing but believing another thing.
There you have it. That's not Fox News. That's the liberal, ultra-liberal, Meet the Press on MSNBC telling us that the blue wave is non-existent. You heard it here first. From a new Wall Street Journal NBC News poll, it's not looking good for the Blues. Ron in Caldwell with Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, Kevin. I'll tell you what I'd like to see put down there on the southwest border is the Red Cross, because that's what those people are going to need, especially if they can get from where they're at to our border. Oh, poor boy. It's going to be a tough road.
Well, what else should we do there?
Well, I think what we're going to do there is we're going to take care of them. We're going to be the humane country that we are.
I don't know about that.
Well, so what are you going to do? How are you going to stop and put tanks up one by one all the way down the southwestern border?
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of open borders, Ron. I don't think that we can afford it when we have Americans that need work, need health care. We can't do this for the entire world. What makes these people so special?
Yeah, you're correct about that. But the thing is, I still like to see the Red Cross down there. You know, I just this is a difficult situation, and it's going to take someone that knows exactly what they're doing. I just don't like to see people get hurt for any reason. It's just my nature, I guess.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to wonder how these people look, Ron. If you and I wanted to go to Guatemala, we'd have to, have enough money to go there. We couldn't just walk there, and we're not, and it's just you and me. We're not talking about thousands of people.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a tough one, sir. And I bid you a good morning.
I bid you a good morning, brother. We can agree to disagree. We move on to traffic. Good morning, Dave.